Good morning, this is Terrence Rebo. We're doing an oral history this morning of Dan Behles, an attorney par excellence. And Dan, would you state your full name?
My full name is Daniel J. Joseph Behles.
Can you tell us what your current status is as a lawyer?
I still maintain an active license. I'm of counsel to the firm of Askew and White, which is a bankruptcy firm. And I'm working very part-time for the firm, and I also am a trustee for the U.S. Trustee's Office in some Chapter 11 cases.
So would it be fair to say that most of the work that you've done in your career is bankruptcy related?
Probably 95%.
Can you give us an overview of your legal career after law school?
When I graduated from law school, I was married to Jenny Behles, and we moved from Albuquerque to Carlsbad, New Mexico, and went to work for Mike Rosenberg and Dick Linden, which was a small general practitioner's firm in Carlsbad. We were with Mike and Dick for a year or two, and then we opened up our own shop for another year. And in '72, I think we came back to Albuquerque because we were looking to purchase a law firm. There was an advertisement in the Bar Bulletin from a guy by the name of Tom Smiley, who was a bankruptcy practitioner. And he was wanting to retire and sell his practice. And we talked to Tom and decided eventually not to buy his practice, but Jenny went to work for him. She became an employee of his firm, which he ultimately sold to some other lawyers. And at that time, I got a job as in-house counsel for a real estate development firm, Falls Land and Development, here in New Mexico. I did that for 3 years. During that period of time, I got divorced from Jenny. I went to work for American Furniture Company as in-house counsel for another 3 years. And in about '78, Jenny had by that time established her own bankruptcy firm and was expanding it, and asked me if I wanted to come back to work with her, and I did. I worked with her and Linda Bloom for a few years. Then I struck out on my own again and opened up a solo practice in about '80, doing essentially bankruptcy work. Really, that's all I had been doing, and so I kept on doing that. In '84, I made a partnership with a young lawyer by the name of Bill Davis, and we built up a fairly substantial firm. By 1989, I think we had 9 lawyers on the payroll. We had a very amicable dissolution of the firm in '89. I went back to being a sole practitioner. I hired a bunch of associates and very quickly learned that I was not very good at managing people. So over the course of a couple of years, I laid everybody off and truly was a sole practitioner. That lasted all through most of the '90s. I then lost my longtime paralegal secretary, who was really running the office with me, and decided I didn't want to try and train somebody new, so I accepted a job as bankruptcy counsel for Cuddy and McCarthy, a Santa Fe firm, but they had an Albuquerque office. And I worked in their Albuquerque office for a couple of years doing bankruptcy work. Then left there and went back to work with George Moore, who was an old employee of mine back in the old days. Eventually became a member of George's firm, and we practiced together for a long time. And then in about 2000 and probably 16 or 17, George didn't want to keep the firm going. He was getting ready to retire, and both of us moved over to Jim Askew's practice. He took us on of counsel, and I've been there ever since.
What is it about bankruptcy work that you liked?
Bankruptcy work is one of those few areas of the law where your clients really appreciate what you do, and you feel like you've made a positive difference in their lives. Some people say it must be depressing because you're working with people and and their financial problems. But hopefully, and most of the time, by the time I'm done with them, or the bankruptcy process is done with them, they're better off than they were when they started.
Explain that.
Well, you know, we've sort of educated the American public to believe that they're entitled to justice. And so most times if somebody has a legal problem and they go to see a lawyer and the lawyer resolves it successfully, they're still somewhat put off by the fact that they have to pay to get what they thought they were entitled to, which was justice in their sense of the word. And of course, if the problem doesn't get resolved, they're doubly upset because they had to pay and not get what they thought they were entitled to for free. But nobody has an expectation that they don't have to pay their debts, that they think they have to pay their debts. And when they come up against the hard fact that they're in over their head and can't possibly survive, and they come to a bankruptcy lawyer, he gets them something that they don't think they're entitled to. They get essentially to walk away from a lot of their debt. And so that's a pleasant surprise for them. They're grateful for what I do. I tell them, thank your congressman, I'm just manipulating the law. Your congressman wrote the law. But I still get a lot of positive feedback from clients because they think I've made a positive direction in their life, and it makes me feel good and it makes them feel good. It's always usually a happier outcome, which is not the case for lawyers who do domestic relations work, or lawyers who deal with personal injury, or lawyers who deal with criminal law. No matter what the outcome, the person ends up worse off than they were before. And when I'm done with them, hopefully they're better off than they were before.
All right. That was my next question. How do you help people become better off at the end of the case than they were at the beginning?
Well, I mean, despite common belief that people who file bankruptcy are simply ne'er-do-wells who can't manage their money, that's really not the case. Most bankruptcies are caused by unexpected events in your life. It's not that you overspent on your credit card, it's that you got divorced, you lost your job, you got injured or sick or laid off. Some unexpected event caused your income to significantly be reduced or disappear entirely. And modern America has been educated to live right up to their paycheck. You know, when they say they live paycheck to paycheck, a lot of people do. You will go buy a new car, they don't really tell you what the price is, they tell you what the monthly payment is. And so if one of these unforeseen events happens and your income is diminished, all of a sudden you can't survive. And so they come to me, or to any bankruptcy lawyer really, and you're able to get them discharged, technically is the term, get relief from a lot of their debt. Not all of their debt, but a lot of the nagging debts that are causing them a problem, they don't have to pay anymore. And so by shrinking their outgo, you hopefully bring it back in line with their income, and so they get what the bankruptcy code refers to as a fresh start, a chance to once again become a useful citizen rather than being mired in debt.
Now, you mentioned different firms that you worked with and different lawyers that were associated with those firms. Tell us about some of the lawyers that you worked with over the years.
Well, when I talk about the bankruptcy bar, it's really a very small bar. When I said that Jenny and I were looking to buy a bankruptcy firm back in the early 70s, the year that we didn't buy Tom Smiley's law firm, he filed 80% of all the bankruptcies that were filed in the state of New Mexico. I mean, it was a one-man show. Over the years, as bankruptcy became a little more mainstream, more and more lawyers took up the practice, but it's still a very minuscule, it's kind of like practicing tax law. It's complicated, it's code intensive, and unless you do it all the time and frequently, it's too much trouble to learn how to do it for one case. So there are a very few firms and solo practitioners who practice bankruptcy law from the debtor's point of view. Now, from the creditor's point of view, most of the creditors' attorneys are allied with big commercial law firms, the Rohdes, the Modrills, the Kellers. Those are the creditors' attorneys because they have the banks for clients and the big businesses who tend to be creditors in bankruptcy. The debtors' attorneys are usually very small. I think the biggest firm that ever existed as a purely bankruptcy firm was when Bill Davis and I had 9 lawyers. Askew and White is now, I think, 4 lawyers. Dave Giddens' firm has probably got 4 or 5 lawyers. Awful lot of sole practitioners. It's a very small bar. The bankruptcy law section of the state bar is a relatively small section. We're very active, and it's a very collegial group of people because you deal with the same people over and over and over again.
So when we were preparing for this, you actually gave me a list of the attorneys who you worked with over the years, and some of them are very well known. So can you think of any of them?
Well, the first guy I ever worked for, Mike Rosenberg, was the president of the state bar the year I went to work for him. And that was back when the state bar was small. There were probably 1,000 lawyers in the whole bar. And back then, the annual meeting, we called it the bar convention, was a big deal, and everybody went. We had 250 people attend the bar convention in 1970. It was in Carlsbad, where Mike was the president. 25% of the bar showed up in person for the annual meeting. And if that ratio held true today, we'd have almost 2,000 people show up, which obviously isn't going to happen. But Mike was my first boss and a real mentor to me. I remember him with fond memory, and he taught me a lot. Then, with respect to bankruptcy lawyers, Jenny Behles, my first wife, who I met in law school, probably taught most of us bankruptcy law because she was the first one. She took over that practice that Tom Smiley had and learned bankruptcy law. And I worked with her. My old law school classmate Gary Ottinger worked with her. George Moore worked with her. Dave Giddens worked with her. Louis Puccini, who ended up being a bankruptcy judge, worked for Jenny. Over the years, almost everybody who has spent a lot of time in bankruptcy, at least in the old days, either worked with or for Jenny or one of the firms that resulted from Jenny's training. It's still a very small club. Sometimes we refer to it as the Smiley Professional Association Alumni Club because everybody has some kind of backhanded tie to those first few lawyers.
It sounds like you've had a very successful career and that you're in the situation where you're mostly retired.
I'm mostly retired. I think I've had a successful career, not financially. I can't make, bankruptcy lawyers typically can't make the kind of money that personal injury attorneys can. You don't get to hit a big payday. The consumer bankruptcy side of the ledger, the people who file Chapter 7s for consumers typically charge flat fees or very small fees. The people who practice for Chapter 11 work and Chapter 13 work, you get to charge an hourly fee, but your fees are always subject to review and allowance by the court. You have to get a court order before you get paid most of the time in reorganization cases. And so we used to call it contingent flat fee work. You hope you can get paid, but sometimes your client can't make it. Sometimes the court says you didn't do the right work. We're not going to allow all your fees, although that's fairly rare. So I made a good living. I never got rich. And right now I'm pretty much retired.
Mm-hmm. What are your plans for retirement?
Oh, well, my partner Luann and I travel a lot. We built a house in the North Valley to retire to, and I like to putter around the house. I do a lot of different things. I've always been interested in building, although I'm not building anymore. I built a house once. I built a mud house out in Corrales in my hippie days. I made 7,000 adobe bricks by hand, 5 at a time in a cement mixer, and went up to the National Forest to cut down trees to build that house. I'm not doing that anymore, but I have a big workshop. We travel, read a lot, still enjoy outdoor activities. I ski occasionally. We're leaving next week for a river rafting trip. Trying to stay active. We're both in our 70s, and it's important, I think, to keep your body moving or it'll rust away on you.
You've been involved with the Senior Lawyers Division for quite a long time. Tell us about your involvement, when it started, and the kinds of things you've done to benefit the Senior Lawyers Division.
Well, I don't know if I've done anything to benefit them, but I got involved in the Senior Lawyers the year I turned 55, because that was then the age limit for being a senior lawyer. And my old friend Brad Zekas was either the head of the division or somehow involved in the division, and he dragged me one day and said, "You got to come and be a senior lawyer." So
Brad was pretty good at that.
he was. He dragged me to a board meeting, and it was one of the first meetings of the year, and they said, "We need a designee to the Board of Bar Commissioners. Who volunteers?" And nobody raised their hand. So Brad said, "You're it." So I've been on the board of the Senior Lawyers for 20 years now, 22. Yeah, 22 years. And I was a member of the Board of Bar Commissioners for 10 years. In my first stretch, then they kicked me off. They said 10 years was long enough. We need to get some fresh blood in here. So they got another senior lawyer to take over the position. And then 2 or 3 years ago, when Jack Burton retired as our BBC liaison, I went back on the BBC. So I've been a member of the Senior Lawyers Board for 22 years, and off and on a member of the Board of Bar Commissioners for, I don't know, 12, 13, 15 years, something like that.
I'd like to switch the discussion back to your personal life. In terms of your earlier years, was there anything in your childhood or early adolescence that influenced the direction of your life to become a lawyer?
No, I would have said the other way around. I never thought that I would be an attorney. My dad wrote advertising copy for industrial clients. I was one of 6 kids, and we all did fairly well in school. My parents never pushed us in any particular direction. When my dad sent me off to college, he said, "I'm not sending you to school to learn how to make a living, I'm sending you to school to learn how to live." Sometimes I wish that he had sort of steered us in the direction of his firm, because I have one of my brothers and myself, I think, would have been good doing what my dad did, but he was very careful not to influence our choices. And so I didn't go to school with any particular goal in mind. I got an undergraduate degree, and then I realized it was the middle of the Vietnam War, and I would have been drafted, which I was somewhat reluctant to allow to happen. So I thought, well, they were still handing out deferments for graduate school, right? And I decided, well, law school would be the least limiting. I still thought I might end up in the business world someplace, but I said a law degree can't hurt, and it'll keep me out of the draft for another year or two. So I signed up for law school just because I didn't want to go to war.
And when did you start law school, and where?
I started school in 1967 in Chicago. I grew up in Chicago. I was a Chicago kid. I went to school, undergrad at Notre Dame in South Bend, Indiana. Came back to Chicago and started law school at Loyola in Chicago on their downtown campus. Spent 2 years there. That's where I met Jenny. We sat in that archetypal lecture where the freshmen are sitting in this big auditorium and they say, "Look to the right, look to the left. Most of you won't be here." We really got that lecture. I happened to be sitting next to one of the 3 women in the auditorium. We both said, "We're going to be here." So we got married after 1 year of school. In our second year of law school, the draft board was coming after me again. They had stopped handing out deferments. and my choices were Vietnam or Canada, and neither one of those was appealing to me. So I decided I would enlist in the reserves if I could. That would at least hold off going overseas. Maybe I could finish school. But everybody in Illinois had the same idea. You couldn't get into the National Guard or the Army Reserves in Illinois. The waiting list was closed. And also about that time, we had started to look around for future careers. We actually had a job offer to be number 151 and 152 on somebody's letterhead in Chicago. And Jenny didn't want to do that. She was from a small town in Nebraska, so we said, let's go out west. So we sat down in our second year of law school, and we wrote a letter to every law school west of the Mississippi River and east of California. That was our target area. And the law school at New Mexico at the time, the dean was a gentleman by the name of Tom Christopher. He was recruiting women. That was 1969, and they really wanted to beef up women in law school. Tom offered Jenny a position and said he would accept the transfer of all of her credits from Loyola. And to my never-ending gratitude, she said, well, if you take me, you got to take him too. So they took me too. We both came out here at the end of our second year of law school and finished at UNM. So my degree's from UNM, but I tell people my education's really from Loyola.
So what happened with the reserves?
Well, I got to New Mexico. I went out to the local Army Reserve outfit, and they signed me right up, and they allowed me to defer my basic training until I finished law school and I took the bar exam. So I think we graduated in June of 70, and in August of 70, after we had moved to Carlsbad and bought a house, I was off in Fort Ord, California doing basic training. Ended up spending 7 years in the reserves, and when we moved back to Albuquerque, I transferred back to a reserve unit from the National Guard, and still have a lot of good friends from my years in the Army Reserve here at Kirtland Air Force Base.
What did you like and what did you dislike about law school?
Law school was hard. I'm pretty much a lazy person. School always came easy to me, so I did what I had to get by. Jenny's was the hardest worker I ever knew, and she made me study. And we used to have study sessions, and I didn't like having to put in the time that it took to get decent grades in law school, but it worked out okay. I don't know that I enjoyed much about anything in law school except that it was better than the Army. And New Mexico was a nice place.
That's a pretty low bar.
Well, New Mexico was a nice place to be at the end. Chicago, all I can remember about Chicago Law School was it was cold and dark, and we rode the subway to work, to school, and my hands froze in the winter, and I don't remember any bright days from law school in Chicago. New Mexico was full of sun, and there was a basketball court out behind the old law school. I went to school on the main campus. They hadn't finished building the new law school yet, so there was a little building, I think it's now architecture or something, I don't know what it is. And I remember law school being a lot more fun.
Were there any courses in law school that you really liked or courses that you really disliked?
I don't remember the courses so much as I remember the professors. I had a constitutional law professor at Loyola by the name of Bill Cunningham. He was a Jesuit priest. He was an amazing guy. He was relatively liberal. Bill defended one of those protest groups during the Vietnam War. I don't know if it was the Cantonsville 9 or somebody 7, but he did a lot of pro bono work for war protesters. A couple of years later, Bill came out to New Mexico and helped me build my mud house on a vacation. I remember him. I remember Fred Hart at UNM teaching Uniform Commercial Code, which was, for a lot of people, a pretty dry subject because it's so code-oriented, so statutory. But the work that I do now in bankruptcy is very statutorily organized, and I think maybe taking a couple of semesters of UCC from Fred Hart helped me develop an affinity for that kind of regimented statutory law practice.
I'm going back a little bit. You mentioned you were sitting in a room at the beginning of law school, and they said, look to your right, look to your left, and there was a woman, that was Jenny. I said.
Right.
How many women were in your class at Loyola, your freshman class?
There were 138 or 139 in the class, and there were 3 women. When we arrived at UNM at the end of our second year, there were, I think, 39 students in the third year class that we were joining. And I think there were 2 women, and Jenny was the third.
That's interesting because my law school, the State University of New York at Buffalo, also in 1969, we had a class of 125, and there were 9 women.
Yeah.
And it was the orientation at that point in time to bring women into the law school classes.
Well, we got here because Tom Christopher was explicitly seeking out women to increase the diversity in his class.
Now, you mentioned some things that you had done outside your practice of law. One of them was building your own house from the ground up, basically.
From below the ground, actually. You have to start by digging down.
What kind of work have you done either for profit or for pleasure outside the area of law?
Well, when I was house counsel for American Furniture Company, I worked for Manny Blaugrad, and he was another good mentor to me. He was a real great guy. There wasn't really enough in-house legal work for me to do, so because I was sort of handy, he made me the operations manager, and I kind of looked over the facilities up at American Square. And I remember one year, Mr. Blaugrad was bidding on a job to install library stacks at the Zimmerman Library at the law school. And he won the bid. And one of the disappointed bidders, one of the people who didn't win the bid, objected to the award on the grounds that American Furniture Company didn't have a contractor's license. Mr. Blaugrad said, contractor's license, these are bookshelves. I'm just going to stand them up. And the other guy said, no, at the end of the wall, where they touch the wall, they have to be screwed into the wall. And you need a contractor's license to do that. So Mr. Blaugrad came into my office and he said, Behles, he said, you know how to look things up in books. We need a contractor's license. Go up to Santa Fe and get us a contractor's license. And back in those days, the test for a contractor's license was an open book test. They gave you the National Building Code and a set of plans, and they asked you to answer questions. And all I did was look stuff up, because that's what they teach you how to do in law school. So I got a general contractor's license for the company, and then over the next year or two, since I was taking on more of those responsibilities, I got an electrical contractor's license, I got a mechanical contractor's license. I had licenses all over the place. But the only thing I ever did was build one house.
Now, I hear tell that in addition to building your own house and being a wonderful lawyer, that you have an affinity for cooking.
I'm a pretty good cook. In my present life with Luann, who is also a good cook if she wants to be, but she doesn't want to be, I'm the cook in the family. I spend a lot of time doing that. That's a pleasure for me. I think it's because I was never tasked with having to do it every day for a big family. It was never a chore for me. It was always fun. I like to get outside. I like river rafting. When I was in partnership with Bill Davis, he was an Air Force pilot, so we bought an airplane and he taught me how to fly. And for 10 or 15 years, we flew all over New Mexico in our little airplane, and I've had some great times with that. That was a good part of my life.
Did you ever get a pilot's license?
Oh yeah. Still have a pilot's license. You don't lose them unless the FAA takes it away, but I haven't flown for a number of years. We sold the airplane when we divvied up the firm, and in retirement, Luann said, why don't you reactivate your pilot's license and we'll buy an airplane and we can travel around as retired people. So I went out to Qatar Flying Service and I hired an instructor pilot to try and get some recurrent training to freshen up my skills because I hadn't flown for a while. And to my sorrow, I found out that I can't hear air traffic control anymore. I have a pretty severe hearing deficit, and so I could still manipulate the controls, but you don't want to not be able to hear air traffic control. So I never reactivated my license. I have a ticket, but I don't fly.
I also heard that you have, in terms of your cooking ability, cooked for as many as 50 people.
Well, cooking isn't exactly the right word. I don't do sit-down dinners for 50 people, but we built a house in the valley that's a pretty good event space, and I like to have picnics in the summertime. And we had a 3rd of July picnic this year, and there were 50 people that showed up, and all I do is spend a week or so getting ready. It's more like a buffet, if you can call that cooking.
But it sounds like it's something you enjoy.
I do enjoy it. Luann doesn't much enjoy the run-up or the tear-down, but she enjoys being at the parties.
Well, it's kind of like everybody wants to party, but nobody wants to clean.
Right.
We kind of glazed over some of your earlier life. Where were you born and where did you grow up?
I was born in Chicago. I grew up in I don't want to call it the inner city. At that time it was the mid-city in St. Benedict's Parish. And then when I was in, I think, second or third grade, my dad moved us out to the far northwest corner of the city, to St. Juliana's, which is where I went to elementary school. And then when I started high school, he moved us further out to the northern suburbs to a place called Glenview, Illinois, which is north of the city, not on the lake, but inland a little bit. And I went to Notre Dame High School for Boys, a Catholic college prep boys school. And that's how I ended up going on to the University of Notre Dame, because I went, the same order of priests ran the prep school as ran the university.
There's been an issue over the years about boys and girls schools, whether it's better to have them separate or it's better to have them co-ed. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I enjoyed my high school years. They were probably the most fun years I had, even at an all-boys school. But I had a sister, I had two sisters, who went to an all-girls Catholic school. That was kind of the sister school for Notre Dame.
Right.
I have one sister that's a year younger than me and one sister that's 3 years younger than me. So we all had classmates that knew each other. I would bring my friends home and she would bring her friends home and we'd have impromptu parties. I would act or be in the plays at the girls' high school, and the girls would come and be the female actors in our high school plays. There was a lot of mixing around, and I don't think that I suffered socially from having nothing but boys in the class. Probably was less distracting, actually. So I don't think I have an opinion one way or another, other than I enjoyed my high school years. I don't think I had any adverse consequences from being in an all-boys school. And the University of Notre Dame was all men at that time. There were no women there either.
You talked about some of your family members before. What type of businesses or professions did they go into?
Well, I have 3 brothers and 2 sisters. I'm the second oldest of 6. All 3 of the boys, besides me, the other 3 are all AIA licensed architects. I don't know how I missed out on that, but maybe that's why I still enjoy building so much. My older brother Tom is retired. My 2 younger brothers, Joe and Ken, they're just in the process of winding down their firm. They're at retirement age, and COVID kind of gave them an excuse to slow down. My youngest sister, Sally, has been a teacher for most of her career. And my older sister, who's just a year younger than me, the one who's closest to me, she was ended up her career as a teacher. She was involved owned a couple of retail stores. She's married to an insurance guy. I would say teaching is probably the common thread that runs through the girls' side of the family, and architecture is what kept the boys on the same track.
Back to your career, are there any cases that you handled that really stick out in your mind as significant cases or important cases, either to the law or to you personally?
I don't think that I ever did anything that was significant to the law. I never got to the Supreme Court. I had a couple of appeals to the 10th Circuit or the 10th Circuit BAP. But personally, probably my best cases came from being a bankruptcy trustee, because as a trustee, you are sometimes called upon to take over and either run or wind down a business. And so I've, over my career, had to either run or slow down almost every kind of business imaginable. The case I remember the most was a used car dealer, a guy by the name of Milton Seals. Milton was, when I first was contacted by the court, Milton was in the federal prison hospital in Jefferson City, Missouri. He had been wounded in a shootout with the FBI in a ditch bank in Corrales. And they accused him of being a drug dealer. While he was in prison, in the prison hospital, he got a hold of an attorney back here in New Mexico and filed a bankruptcy. I got appointed to be his trustee. Bill and I flew our airplane back to Jefferson City to interview Milton in the hospital. And then I was tasked with gathering up his estate and liquidating it. And for strange reasons, liquidating Milton Seals' estate probably touched on every branch of the law you can think of. He was in the middle of a domestic dispute with his wife, which is the reason the FBI was lying in wait for him, because he was being accused of kidnapping her, although I'm not so sure how much compulsion there was. But having an ex-spouse or a disenchanted spouse is great for a trustee, because you know where all the dirt is buried. And in Milton's case, I dug up a coffee can full of cash in the floor of his horse stable in Corrales. His wife said, sift the gravel in the fish tank, and I came up with a handful of gold coins. I ended up with a stack of casino gaming chips from Las Vegas, and I called them up and I said, I need to cash in these chips. And they said, oh, you can only do them at the table. So I asked the judge if I could go to Vegas to cash in the chips. And he said, no, but he gave me a court order that required them to cash the chips in by mail. He had an antitrust suit going against Nissan because he was buying black market cars and the local dealers didn't want him, and Nissan cut him off, and we settled the antitrust suit. He eventually, during the course of my administration, died, and we had a fight over the life insurance policy, which he had tried to change beneficiaries of like 2 weeks before he died. Just every different kind of case that you could imagine. The FBI had civilly confiscated $300 and some odd thousand that they found in the trunk of the car when they ambushed him in Corrales. They claimed it was drug money. Turned out it wasn't drug money, but we had to have a civil trial in front of federal judge John Conway, because I said, I want the money to pay creditors. The FBI said, or the U.S. attorney said, no, we want the money is for civil forfeiture. So I got to do a little bit of everything in that case. It was really mind-expanding experience. I got into realms of the law that you never would have thought of getting into as a bankruptcy attorney.
Was there any experiences that you had doing bankruptcy law that caused you to either doubt whether you should continue in that area or enhance your willingness to participate as a bankruptcy lawyer?
Nothing ever put me off of bankruptcy law. I thoroughly enjoyed it, still do. Like I said, I typically get positive feedback from my clients. As one of the things I'm doing now is trustee in certain kinds of small business Chapter 11 cases. And the trustee's role in these Subchapter 5 cases, they call them, is to try and get the people to work together to come to a resolution so you don't have a lot of litigation. Kind of, I guess you could call it an ombudsman's role. And I've had a few cases where we actually got the people to sit down and come together and agree on a resolution. And that's fun when that happens, when you can help people work together to come to a solution. So I can't say I've ever not enjoyed doing bankruptcy law. It's always been fun.
And it sounds like that in your mind has been your significant contribution to the law.
Well, I don't know how significant it was. It was fun for me. The only other quote job I ever had, I spent 8 years as the municipal prosecutor for the village of Corrales when I lived out there. And an awful lot of my great war stories come from being an attorney in a little town like Corrales, where the most serious criminal affairs I ever had to deal with were noise ordinance violations and speeding past a stopped school bus. But I had a lot of good experiences doing that in a small town in New Mexico.
Were you part-time in that position?
Oh yeah, that was when I moved out there. I forget how I think when I went to get a building permit for the house I wanted to build, I think I met the mayor and she said we need a village attorney, and I just sort of became the village attorney. It involved typically maybe 1 or 2 evenings a month when they held municipal court. Some were traffic violations and some were these small misdemeanor things. I probably got paid $100 a month, which was pretty good money back then. I did have another job besides municipal prosecutor. When I was a young lawyer just hanging out my shingle in 80, after I left Jenny and started out for myself, I got a job teaching at the Anderson School of Management at UNM. There was a lawyer there by the name of Jim Porter who was looking for instructors for his CPA candidates, because people who are going to sit for the CPA exam have to know corporate law, partnership law, agency, that kind of stuff. So he hired me and a couple other young lawyers to teach third and fourth year business school students business law, basically. We got paid $10 an hour. And I worked there for, I think, 3 or 4 semesters. I think 2 courses. Took me a few hours a week. And once in a while I bump into one of my old students from those years, and they tell me what a hard instructor I was, because I used to grade them on their English. And they said, "This is a business course, what do I have to know English for?" And I said, "Well, someday you're going to have to write notes for a financial report, and it better be legible and readable to the rest of the population."
You've been a lawyer now for
52 years. I got my ticket in August of 1970. In fact, back then, you took the bar exam starting on a Monday morning, and you wrote it for a half a day. You had lunch and you wrote for a half a day. There was no multi-state, no multiple choice. It was all essay questions. You wrote for 2.5 days. And the Board of Bar Examiners started grading the exams as soon as you finished. Like, we wrote Monday morning. While we were writing Monday afternoon's questions, they were grading Monday morning. So we finished the exam on Wednesday at lunchtime and went out and had a big party. And they posted the results on the door of Rosemary Alderetti, the Supreme Court clerk. I think Friday morning they hung up the results on the door. There's this big crowd of kids crunching around, and Jenny and I's only concern was, what if one of us passes and one of us didn't, because we already had a job offer. Fortunately, we both passed.
There's a current dispute as to the bar exam, as to whether it's necessary, whether it does what it's intended to do. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I think that a bar exam is useful. I'm sorry to say that I have sometimes run into attorneys, and I don't know why they're attorneys, because they seem relatively unschooled in what I consider to be basic concepts. I probably was that way myself back then, so I can't say that I'm speaking from an unbiased viewpoint, but I think, particularly since we're supposed to be one of those learned professions, the public is well served by having some minimum standard met by people who are admitted to the profession. I'm not sure that there needs to be 50 different bar exams for 50 different jurisdictions. While there are admittedly variations in the laws from state to state to state, I've always felt somewhat constrained by the fact that I got a ticket in New Mexico. If I wanted to move back to Chicago and practice law, I'd have to take the bar exam all over again, which I will never do. My partner Luann is a physician. You have to get a medical license in each state, but you don't have to take medical courses all over again. You have to be familiar with the licensure rules and the legal part of being a physician to get a license in another state. But you don't have to prove that you know how to practice medicine, because hopefully the right solution in New Mexico is also the right solution in Texas or Indiana or wherever you want to go. So I would not do away with the bar exam. I wouldn't object to people tinkering with it to make it a little more uniform, and I certainly think things like the multi-state ethics exam are a good idea. There was no ethics exam when I passed the bar, and I think that it's a good thing to have.
What, if anything, have you seen in terms of the changes in the practice of law from the time you were admitted until the present?
Well, today it's a business. When I got out of law school, it was still a profession. My first boss, Mike Rosenberg, I think the first day we walked into his office, he said, you're a professional. He said, you're not here to make money, you're here to take care of your clients. And he said, that's what I want you to understand. Take care of your clients, and they will take care of you. You will earn a decent living, you won't ever be hungry, you'll have a respected position in the community if you take care of your clients first, put their interests foremost. A nice standard of living will follow as an inevitable result if you take care of your clients. And I don't think that's true anymore. With the advent of advertising and the advent of, I don't know how to say it, and I'll probably get in trouble with the rest of the bar for saying it, but I think that litigation has, to a certain extent, caused a lot of problems in the United States. I can't reconcile myself to the fact that multi-state firms advertise on late night TV. If you've been injured, you call us, or if you think you might have a problem, call us. We're creating an expectation in America that there's no such thing as bad luck. If something happens to you that you don't like, it must be somebody else's fault, and you should be able to sue them for it. And I don't think that's true. Certainly underrepresented people need representation. There's a crying need for legal services for disadvantaged groups, but not to the extent that just because some bad thing happened, you ought to be able to sue somebody. I would never be admitted to the Trial Lawyers Association, I'm pretty sure, because I don't think I'm on, I have their same mindset. And, you know, clients come to me and say, I need a divorce lawyer, or I need this kind of a lawyer. Who should I go to? They say, I was thinking about hiring that person that has a big billboard out on the freeway. And I said, you know, I wouldn't do that. The reason that guy out on the freeway has that big billboard is because he doesn't have enough to do. The really good lawyers don't have display ads and billboards and late night TV shows. You don't see the module firm having a 8-page spread in the yellow pages or a TV ad. The good lawyers get work from client referrals, from other lawyers. But I think the only way a young person today could build a practice is by advertising, and it forces him into looking at the law as a business rather than as a profession. And I think that's been to the detriment of the legal system. I think we would be better served if people still looked at it as a profession.
And just to protect you from getting in trouble with all those different kinds of people, these are your opinions, your personal opinions.
These are my personal opinions. You know, advertising is a First Amendment right. Lawyers have a right to advertise, and they make a lot of money doing it, or else they couldn't afford to do it. So I just think that if we could focus more on service to clients as opposed to how much money can we make, we'd all be better off.
Mm-hmm. So I want to go back to the question about how have you seen changes in the way law is practiced from the time you first got your ticket until the present?
Well, the big change in the last 30 years probably has been computers and online research. When I first started doing complicated bankruptcy law in a Chapter 11 case, if there was a difficult problem, I'm a one-man shop. I got to do my own research. Paul Fish, my adversary at the model firm, he's got 18 young associates he can send out to the law library to do research, and he can bury you in citations and stuff. It was very difficult for a solo practitioner or a small law firm to muster the manpower that it took to come up with fancy briefs and legal arguments that a big firm could do with all our research power. But that's changed now with computers. Today, the right answer to a complex legal problem comes from the person who can ask the computer the right question. And I've been doing this long enough that I can ask the right question. I'm sure Paul Fish can ask the right question, but if he sends his second or third year associates to the computer to ask questions, instead of doing it himself, I'm going to come up with a better answer. So I think that research has changed so much that it's leveled the playing field. A little firm can compete with a big firm when it comes to finding precedent, finding case law, writing briefs, because it's all in how you ask the question, not how many books can I pile up and go through that head notes looking for an answer.
I've heard people say that it's more difficult to practice law today than it has been in the past. And there are several areas that are involved in that opinion. Number one, collegiality. Number two, professionalism. Number three, what you said about computers. And number four, the general kind of adversarial approach to litigation that in the 1980s was described as Rambo litigation.
Yeah, one of the really nice things about bankruptcy law is that we never got into adversarial litigation. The reason being is that in the bankruptcy court, we're typically arguing over money. It's just dollars. And we all have the same idea of what a dollar is worth. And in bankruptcy, there's usually a limited amount of money available, and the cost of arguing over it comes out of that pot. So the more money that attorneys waste in useless discovery, the less money flows through to the creditors who are the ones paying the bills. And so you never have disputes, I say never, you very infrequently have a bankruptcy fight that devolves into abusive discovery. We all want to get to the right answer as expeditiously as possible. I agree that Rambo litigation, as you call it, is a problem, not in bankruptcy. And that's one of the good things about practicing just in the bankruptcy court. Okay. Collegiality, likewise, because we're such a small bar and because we see the same people day after day, month after month, in and out all the time, I don't think we're any nicer than the rest of the bar as a whole, but you very quickly learn whose word you can trust and who you better file a motion on. And so it becomes an easy place to practice because we only have two judges and they're both very smart people. We have a narrow group of people that you interact with and you know them all well, and we're all friends with each other, and if there are a few bad apples, you quickly learn who they are and learn how to protect yourself. So there aren't any surprises. I hate going to state court. I try never to go there because you're going to get a judge you don't know, you're going to run into lawyers, you have no idea how they're going to handle themselves. Bankruptcy is a nice, safe little pond where everybody is more or less friendly. I do agree that it's harder to practice law nowadays. I think it's harder for a lot of reasons. I don't know how a young person would build up a sole practice anymore. I mean, when I went out on my own, I had been doing bankruptcy for a number of years, and my clients came to me as referrals, typically from other lawyers. Because generally speaking, lawyers who don't do bankruptcy want to get those cases referred out to somebody, and that's where I got most of my cases from, other lawyers or other judges. Or other clients. I don't know how a young person today could generate a practice without advertising, and that changes the practice from a profession to a business.
Last question.
Okay.
One of the most difficult questions. What words of wisdom do you have that you would like to share with younger lawyers who might be watching this video?
Nobody ever watches these things, Terry. Younger lawyers, any lawyers, the most valuable thing that I have, I hope, is my reputation. If I tell somebody I'm going to do something, I do it. If I tell them they can have an extension, they have it. If the judge tells me to do something, I do it. That's a trust that you have to build up with the legal community, the courts, and your client base over a long period of time. And one little misstep can ruin that forever. So it's kind of like, what's the modern equivalent? Don't ever post anything on your Facebook page that you don't want the whole world to know, because once it's out there, it's out there. Don't ever do anything as a lawyer, even if you don't think anybody will find out, that will compromise your reputation for honesty and integrity, because it will get out someday, and you'll ruin what you may have spent years building up. And that goes along with, if you follow that road, you're going to be more collegial. You're not going to be adversarial unless it's necessary to protect your client. You're going to be more fun to deal with as a lawyer, which means other lawyers will want to deal with you and will refer their cases to you. You'll be more successful as an ethical, professional, and collegial person than if you're not. So if you want to be a successful lawyer, be a professional, ethical, collegial lawyer.
Is there anything else that I haven't asked you about that you'd like to add?
You know, I don't think so. I can say that I have enjoyed being a lawyer for 52 years. I don't have any immediate plans to not have a license, although I don't want to work very much hard anymore. But like most of us, when you ask me, who am I? I'm a lawyer first. That's been my persona. But don't let being a lawyer be the only thing in your life. I've enjoyed flying airplanes, building houses, cooking, traveling. I once owned a printing press. I've done a lot of different things, and that kind of balance in your life is necessary if you really want to have a fulfilled life. The buzzword today is work-life balance. I don't know. I don't think that term existed back when I started practicing, but it's important, and you can have both if you keep balance in your life.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, we go off the record at this point.
Okay.